Sup everyone, Skies here, and welcome back to my devlog series for Circle of Orion, a turn-based JRPG that I'm making in Unreal Engine. So I started the month off by adding a bunch of temp music into the game for the overworld and also for the towns and dungeons. For temp music, generally, I just go to Open Game Art and get a bunch of CCO music from there. And while I'm not able to find everything I need, it gives me a good variety. There's a few artists in particular that I really like, and so I've been using a lot of their stuff. But that mixed with ambience and sound effects gives me a nice sort of aesthetic and feel to everything, obviously along with the actual visuals, so where everything's kind of coming together aesthetically already, at least in an early stage. I also added the rest and in system that'll restore your HP and MP once you, pay enough money. And although the paying isn't in just yet, I went ahead and made my own little rest jingle. Next up is I've been working on the shop system, and you're not able to buy and sell anything right now, but at least the menu is open, and I can give custom inventories to different vendors, and you can display what their inventory is as well as your own inventory. This is useful because I essentially just use the data asset collection component from Omega Game Framework, which I'm thinking of renaming the inventory components. That's basically what it is. And then just having an inventory that will list out the items that are inside it, and then I can use different gameplay tags to determine what extra variables we're going to show, like how much does that item cost, how many are in that inventory, stuff like that. The next thing I worked on was the second town in the game, which is actually more of a city. I kind of realized that, especially with the way I'm making the game with zones, it's kind of difficult making cities in a way that's both believable, where you can kind of feel the scale of it and the layout makes sense, while also making it small enough to where you don't have to design an insane amount of content for it. I am not very good at level design in general, and making a city was a difficult time for me, especially because I couldn't really use Townscaper for this. It didn't quite fit the needs for a actual city. So what I ultimately decided on is I'm just going to give you kind of a few small-ish districts to walk around in. You have the airship docks, which is where you first arrive there. You have the market square, which is the more city area. You'll have a side street that you can walk down, although I'm not sure what I'm going to put there just yet. But it's one of those things like, if it wasn't there, the city would feel really small, so it needs to be there just for the sake of the role-playing and the scale. And then lastly, the palace, which initially was just the throne room, but I ended up adding kind of an entrance area and a library, both of which need a lot more work. And I think just probably I'll add a couple more rooms, just for the sake of the story. And working on the city gave me a good excuse to work on my next plugin for the Unreal Marketplace, called World Mason. World Mason, which is available now, you can all go and get it for $30 on the Unreal Marketplace. It's essentially a plugin that gives you a bunch of functions for building out levels. And by building out levels, it's a lot more about like building out things like houses or city blocks or fences or walls, just different things that you would put in a level. And it does this by essentially just creating simplified functions to populate an area with different meshes based on things like a spline or a driver. Pretty simple stuff, but saved me a lot of time on prototyping all sorts of different things. And yeah, again, it's available for everyone on the Unreal Marketplace now. As I was adding just wandering NPCs and pedestrians to the towns here, though, I started to have some performance concerns, because especially depending on what platform I'm releasing on, CPU concerns are a lot bigger to me than the GPU concerns. Basically having to do with how much code can be processed at once. So I started making what I'm calling the logic culling component. The way this works is that you apply it to an actor, typically like an NPC, and then as you get farther away from them, it'll start reducing their time dilation rate, as well as their tick rate. So essentially they are processing slower and not eating up information. And once you get far enough away from them, or if you're just not seeing them rendered on screen at all, their logic will just freeze completely, so it's not running anything if they're not actually on screen. That's how it's supposed to work. Unfortunately, the part of them not running if they're not on screen isn't working. I'm trying to figure out why, but that's kind of the idea behind it for optimizing performance. I know Unreal 5 has its own crowd simulation system. I'm not really sure if that's going to solve my problems, because aside from it being a lot more complicated and I'd have to learn how to use the ins and outs of it, I'm still toying around with the idea of making every NPC interactable with at least having like one line of dialogue to kind of add to that immersion aspect. At that point, I started working on the second dungeon for the game, which is kind of a mountainy area with giant wasps and snakes to fight. This is where I started getting a lot more use out of Crixel's Megascan's assets, which, when I combined with my own custom shader, gave me some really nice looking results. Although the area definitely needs a lot more detail, I'm going to have to figure out ways of adding a bunch of detail procedurally in a way that's natural without taking up too much time. Regarding Megascan assets, one issue I started running into was actually not with those, but with similar assets I'd gotten from the marketplace. See, the strength of Unreal's new nanite system is that you can have millions of polygons at screen at once and it doesn't hit performance because of how it automatically handles LODs. This is great for stuff that's super high polygon, but the ironic thing is that when I'm trying to apply my custom shader to assets from the marketplace like rocks I got, you see the difference in quality pretty strongly, because those are all much lower in poly count because they were made before nanite was a thing, so obviously they use normal maps and things like that to add a lot of the detail. So I was trying to think of how I could take a lot of those assets and essentially bring them up to the level of nanite. Well, fortunately, Unreal 5 has built-in modeling tools, and one of those tools is the ability to actually bake geometry on from a texture map. So what I did is I would take those rocks that I got from the Unreal Marketplace, I'd run a function that would subdivide it to give it a much higher poly count, and then I would apply the red or green channels from the normal map onto the actual mesh to give it a much higher level of detail. It does seem like it would have been better to use a displacement map and not a normal map to get that level of detail, because the normal map wasn't putting everything exactly in the correct direction, but it gave me good enough results and I didn't have a displacement map to use, so I went along with it as it is, and I think everything kind of blends together really well now. While I was working on the second dungeon, I figured this would also be a good time to go and try implementing a mini-map system. Now, I really did not want to have to create a system where I drew each map by hand based on whatever the map was and then import it into the engine, because that was going to cause so many issues if I ever wanted to go and change stuff. But I also didn't want to go with the whole just snapshot from the sky and then use that as the map method, because that's kind of ugly. It doesn't give you a good idea of where you can move and what you can do. So instead, I used a bit of geometry scripting to create a mesh that builds along a spline, similar to my spline blocks. Then I give it just a transparent blue material, and then I do a screen capture of just that mesh on top of a black background, which will give me the basic mini-map that I want, and that way I can just use the spline to determine how I want the map to be laid out, and it's a much easier iteration process. I also added a component that I can put on any actor that can make them appear on the mini-map. I then also created a similar spline mesh geometry scripting system for blocking volumes. Now, Unreal Engine has a default blocking volume actor, which blocking volumes are just invisible walls. But being a box, the geometry on it is more restrictive, and you had to add a bunch of them and align them perfectly in order to get the exact areas blocked that you want blocked. And it's hard to see, because it's just a bounding box. So instead, I created my own version that builds along a spline and uses a custom material that very clearly specifies this area as not being enterable or blocking anything that tries to go into it. So I think it's about time I talk about the battle system, because while not everything is implemented, I think I have a clear idea of how I'm wanting to handle all the gimmicks and mechanics for it. Combat in Circle of Orion works on a system of turns and rounds. Basically, at the start of every round, every character that's in battle, who's not either dead or stunned or something similar, will get factored into the turn order. Then their speed gets calculated, and that determines the order in which they act in. Then once the order is used up, a new round will begin. This way ensures everyone is able to actually act, but you still have an advantage of going first. The gimmick for combat that I'm going for now is similar to the break system in Octopath Traveler. The way it works is that there are several different damage types or elements in the game that each character has an affinity to. The affinities right now are neutral, weak, lethal, resist, strong, absorb, and reflect. In addition, every character has a stagger meter, which is essentially the number of times they can get hit with an element or damage type that they're weak to before they are staggered. And when staggered, they essentially lose their ability to act for a turn or two. So the trick is exploiting enemy weaknesses through the use of elemental attacks and magic. Now, magic is not something your characters have automatically with them, but rather it's something learned through the Grimoire system. The Grimoire system is my other main gimmick I'm going for this game, and it's essentially how magic works in here. To summarize, as you explore throughout the world, you'll come across these books called grimoires, and they're essentially just books that contain magic spells. You'll then equip this grimoire onto one of your characters, and it will give them access to that spell. However, upon gaining enough experience with that grimoire equipped, your character will learn that spell permanently, and will be able to continue using it even after the grimoire is removed. The idea being that when a character first learns a spell, they need the actual instructions on how to use it, but using it enough times and they'll simply internalize it and be able to use it as second nature, so they don't need the grimoire anymore. To avoid making things too easy though, and I'm actually surprised not more turn-based RPGs do this, is that rather than having normal enemy encounters be pre-designed, you know, like, oh, this one will have 3 slimes, and this encounter will have 2 slimes and 2, skeleton monsters, I instead designed it that each encounter has a random chance of spawning a certain amount of different types of monsters. So you never know what to expect with every new normal encounter, and you could get completely caught off guard if you're not careful. Especially if you run into a situation where, say, you have a few enemies that are weak to one element, but then a few other enemies that are immune or even absorb that element, so you can't just hit them all with it because that'll cause trouble. And so that's the general gist of how combat encounters and progression work. As I got towards the end of the month, there was a bunch of little things I just started to work on, tweaks to audio or to movement, or just small bug fixes, kind of stuff that's not really easy to talk about but is important to the feel of the game. I also created quick blockouts for 2 more towns and an additional dungeon, though they're all in a very early stage where they're more meant to just function, rather than be anywhere near final. And lastly, as I was moving around on the overworld, I realized it took quite a while to get between point A and point B sometimes, which definitely helps with the scale of the world, but is also kind of inconvenient when you're just trying to get from one place to another quickly. Now, obviously, you're going to get a boat and an airship to travel across the world later in the game, but I'm thinking early on having some option to get mounts of some type. That'll allow you to, at a click of a button, switch onto the mount on the overworld and then move around faster. And to add into the immersion of the world, I have also, for the early parts of the game when you don't have your own airship, added the ability for you to buy passes on the airships to different points across the overworld. Now, it's not going to be a fast travel, you can go anywhere at any time. You'd have to actually go from airship dock to airship dock, and so you're still kind of limited on how you can go about in a way that makes sense for the world and story, but it still gives you an easy way of, 1, going back and forth between areas you've traveled before, and also just moving around the world faster. You may have seen on Twitter I posted something regarding an affinity system in the game. I'm not ready to quite talk about that because that gets into the topic of reactivity, which is something I'd probably want to save for the next devlog when I have more stuff to show in regards to it, but that's essentially a way of making sure that even though the game has a linear story and a fairly linear progression, you as the player can still feel like you're having some impact on the world. But again, that'll be a topic for the next video. This month's devlog shoutout goes to Mailtail from Robin Lee Heist. This appears to be a sort of Breath of the Wild type open world game where you play as a fox girl delivering mail. It seems to have elements of combat, of gaining new abilities as you find new items, and all sorts of things like that. What I really like about it is how it already has a very nice, polished feel to a lot of it, between the visuals, the animations, and the sound effects. I especially really like the art for the character portraits, as well as the UI animations. That's something a lot of devs, not even just indie devs, I feel often don't pay enough heed to, is the animation of the UI, and not making the interface feel really stiff to navigate. The game Mailtail is also available to wishlist on Steam, so if you want to do that, or just check out his devlog series, which he just put out the first episode of last week, the link will be in the description below. And that is all for this month. Thank you once again, everyone, for watching and supporting me through this. I'm really makes my day whenever I see someone watch one of my videos and tell me how excited they are to actually play the game. It helps my excitement to actually work on it and make sure it's great. So again, thank you one and all. be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all next time.